Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 67. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier on in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going with you?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. I had a couple laughs there. Couldn't stop laughing. We're both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Great, Nick. Hey, episode 67 is actually the second half of a interview we did with
John White, owner of a mentoring school, I believe, works at Google, went to the cloud.
That's it. Right. So we recorded what we thought was one episode of an update of me and my career progression and the job I took at Google Cloud and any lessons that I thought that I'd learned. And it ended up being long enough that, and not enough stuff to cut, that we just decided to turn it into two episodes. So if you haven't listened to episode 66, the first half of this, you might want to check that out. If you just don't care, here is the rest of the interview with, one more time,
John White.
All right, here it is.
Let the grilling continue. So as a result of making this change, John, has your professional development strategy changed at all based on our previous talks?
I think a lot of the skills and a lot of the strategies and tactics that we've kind of talked about, I used in this process. I applied everything that we talked about in my HR screening calls, everything that we talked about in my initial interviews, and Google does this on-site kind of 4-hour interview process, not one 4-hour interview. It's like broken up into 3 interviews and multiple breaks. But all of those things, I knew who I was, I knew what I was good at, and I took every opportunity to prepare. The Google was pretty good about having a document already ready of like, here's what all the interviews are and here's what we're looking for. And, I bet that you can imagine some of the questions that we're going to ask you, and you should probably think about those questions that you think we're going to ask you and prepare, more than one answer. And, I took all that advice and it was, correct and great, and it worked out. So, yeah.
Okay. Now, as far as internal opportunities for advancement, do you feel like you have just as many, if not more, now that you've made the change?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, like it's difficult to compare, to employers. I don't want to say that there wasn't room for advancement and growth at VMware. That's just not true. Like I had great managers who were pushing me to get new skills, to advance. I was promoted multiple times. So, room for advancement, room for growth, was definitely there. That I would say maybe the difference with Google is that as an organization, it's fairly young, but has ambitious growth goals and funding from Alphabet and, Google writ large, right? So Google Cloud is the organization that I work for that sells, cloud infrastructure and value-added services, data warehousing, all those types of things. And like I said, it feels like it's working for a startup. The startup just happens to be funded by Google and housed in Google and provided with all those Google perks, right? So it's not a startup, right? Like it's it's part of the parent organization, but but it feels like it. So the growth, and the actual growth that's happening and the growth targets, as far as like increasing headcount, and those kinds of things are seem very ambitious, right? Somebody like informally and said, hey, maybe we should have a discussion about anybody who wants to become a manager, like if that's in your you know if you that's one of your goals and you can see that, then like sit down with your manager and talk about a path to do that, because we're going to need more managers because we're hiring more people. So that, and they're just very open about that and saying this is what we need. We're If we hire them from outside, that works too, but if we can find people inside and hire more customer engineers, then that'll be another path, right? So
Okay. Now, tell me about family life, John. Has that changed at all since you made this decision to make a move? And did you apply any of the same ideas that Mike Burkhart talked about in his interview, where he decided, here's what I want life to be like?
yeah, I wish that I'd heard Mike's advice ahead of time, because that would have been something that I actually weighed. Uh, I did not anticipate how big of a change going into the office, more regularly versus working from home more regularly would be, right? So when I worked at VMware, I actually, live near the headquarters. So I would go into headquarters, probably at least once a week. I was doing the VMware Communities Roundtable podcast, and that was every Wednesday. So, going in every Wednesday at the very least was in the cards. But it's a little bit different when that's where you do your primary work, and and I guess by primary work I mean that's when you're spending your primary work hours. So, um, whereas with the Communities Roundtable podcast on Wednesdays, I could go in at 11:30, when the podcast started at 12, or sometimes 11:59 when the podcast started at 12. Um, and whereas like primary work hours, like you know, I mean, if you roll into the office at noon, like every once in a while, that's probably okay. But most likely you're you know, again, kind of primary like work hours, what makes sense for you.
Now, you hinted at some flexibility in your work hours earlier in our discussion. Do you have to be there a set 9 to 5, 8 to 4, 7 to 3, anything like that?
No, I don't think anybody said anything about that. I think, you know, getting your work done and being present for meetings and things like that is probably more of the emphasis. And and now that I think about it, you know, I definitely have seen people there, at 6 in the morning, but like, they might go to there at 6 in the morning because they work out in the gym, and then they take a shower, and then they eat breakfast, right? And I think the earliest that I've probably been there is like 7, because that's when they start serving breakfast. And
Good choice.
that's how I roll.
You have to
um,
follow the free meat.
yes. So at least in San Francisco, you know, they they're scrambled eggs every day, but bacon is only on Wednesdays. So yeah, that's pretty important. Smoked salmon on Fridays. So those are the two important days to be there. No, I'm just joking about that. I think that part of the benefit of being there, every day, is that all your colleagues are there too. So I don't know if this was your experience, in like team meetings or quarterly briefings or, business reviews or anything like that. But a lot of times I get together with my fellow solution engineers at VMware, and we bounce ideas off of each other, or, ask questions and say, hey, what do you think about this? I'm running into this. And then inevitably at the end, we'd say, man, we should do this more often. And then we wouldn't. Right.
Yep.
Well, that kind of thing happens every day in the office at Google. So I don't I actually have never worked as an inside SE, you know, where you're kind of more like in a call center situation. Um, but you know, I imagine that that's a benefit in that situation. I just assume, but you know, it's definitely something that I'm seeing as a benefit. You know, seeing my colleagues every day means that if I have, you know, questions about training or questions about priorities or, you know, should I be doing this or that? Hey, what's the way that we do this? You know, what's the googly way to get this done? Um, how often is it okay to say googly? You know, all of those kinds of questions are questions that I can ask my colleagues, you know, just because we bump into each other because we're sitting near each other. Um, you know, and which isn't to say like, you know, we just go into the office 9 to 5 and grind it out. You know, there's customer meetings, you know, hey, you know, take care of this thing and I'm going to work half day from home and half day in the office. You know, all those things happen. So, you know, it's just, I don't know. At least for me, like I thought, you know, listen, the first year that I'm here, I'm going to be in the office, you know, 5 days a week, if that feels reasonable, you know, and you know they give me the freedom to do that or not, right? But I need to make those relationships, meet those people, and this isn't something that I just came to on my own. You know, I got guidance from other people who had gone through the situation, you know, gone through the adjustment, even you know, who had gone through the adjustment from VMware. You know, I reached out to some of those people and said, hey, you know, what's it like? What should I expect? And they, you know, gave me a lot of great feedback and guidance. So, um, yeah, you know, that just being in the office like that change. You know, getting back to your original question of you know personal life, like that means that I don't have the freedom to, you know, if my wife is working from home and I'm working from home in the mornings, then we can, you know, bump into each other and have that same type of like personal, you know, interaction, you know, during the day. You know, so I'm away from her and she's here or she's at her job, you know, working. Um, and that means that we're just apart more, you know, whereas before I could take a 15-minute break and she could take a 15-minute break and we could just, you know, face to face catch up, and that's something that we just don't seem to have the freedom to do now, and that's a loss. You know, if you had that before, most people don't have that, right? Most people are working in an office, and we're just kind of privileged to have this, you know, had this, in my case, have had this job where, you know, the expectation was that I was doing most of my job from home. Um, to give up, you know, that privilege is a big blow, right? So you have to figure out what the cost of that is, and you know, are you being compensated enough? If you know, that's one question. You know, in money or opportunity or whatever. And I felt like it was worth it. You know, and other people said to me, hey, you know, for the first year, maybe you're there 5 days a week, you know, 9 to 4 or 8 to 4 or whatever it is, but you know, and then maybe you back off. Maybe at that point you've made the connections that you need to make. You have, you know, relationships with the people you need to have, and maybe you're rolling into the office at 10:30 every day, or you know, you know, working there from you know noon to 4 or you know or whatever makes sense. You know, you reassess at that point, but you probably in that first year need to build as many relationships in person as possible, and I found that to be extremely valuable.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you there's nothing that can compare with the in-person meeting and relationship development that comes from that. And I know that there've been a lot of folks at VMware that I've talked to on the phone but never met in person, and you know, once I meet them in person, it just makes it that much easier to reach out to them again. But I agree with you. The proximity within sight allows you to be more open to ask people around you for help. And I think maybe when we're out there in the field and not in close proximity to somebody, we might feel like, well, I'm not sure who to ask because a little bit of the out of sight, out of mind problem.
Right.
Oh, hey, I do have teammates I could reach out to ask. I just don't talk to them enough to remember to do that, as simple as that sounds.
Yeah.
But Another thing I was going to ask you, John, speaking of proximity, is your manager local? Does he or she work out of the office as well, or is this remote management?
No, no, he's there in the same office as well.
Okay.
And that goes to for the sales manager and the sales reps that we're covering. They all work out of the same office in San Francisco. In fact, that's how at least Google seems to be organizing their teams is when they can by geography. So at least in the Bay Area, there's multiple offices, right? There's the ones down in Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and where headquarters is, and then the ones up in San Francisco, and those are separate teams, and those teams, are located usually it seems in one place or the other. It's not like um, half of our team is in Sunnyvale and half of it is in San Francisco. It's everybody's in San Francisco or everybody's in Sunnyvale. At least I think that's the way it works. I'm 3 months in.
Sure. Still learning.
Yeah.
We'll have to follow up with you down the road and see if that's still the case.
Right. I've definitely, by the way, I want to clarify this. I've definitely met colleagues who were located in geographies where there was no Google Office, so they were 100% field. So those positions also exist at Google Cloud. It's not, oh, we don't have an office there, we don't cover it, right? Like nobody works there. No, that's definitely not the case. So, yeah. But my experience is like pretty, specific to me, I guess.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, how about this one? What do you miss the most about VMware?
Oh, that's easy. I miss the people, right? So I had great colleagues, um, and a great manager, great director. I really enjoyed interacting with my customers, and I felt like pretty good about maybe one on one reaching out to my colleagues, and I just haven't really felt comfortable like reaching out to my people I knew as customers to say, hey, I'm at Google Cloud now. Do you want to like go out and grab lunch like that? It just feels a little bit slimy. Like I'm asking them to move over. So if they reach out to me, then I'm happy to say hello. I didn't want to um, you know, feel that way, right? Like as if like our interactions were me asking them to come over and be a customer at this new place that I'm working. Um, so I
Sure.
kind of held back from doing that, but I did have like what felt like pretty good personal relationships with some of those people. At least we interacted on a not strictly business relationship. We would just chat about a bunch of other things when we were together, or hang out at VMworld and talk about a bunch of other things. And so I kind of miss. I don't know why I drew this line. I didn't even I don't think realize it until you just asked me. But yeah, like former customers, that I was directly covering, I didn't reach out to, and for the most part, we haven't really talked.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't even thought about that. As far as colleagues that you interacted with at VMware, have you been able to keep in touch with them since you moved? How's that going?
Yeah. So you and I do a podcast. So my new goal is to do a podcast with every single, former colleague. And that way we have at least some excuse. No, that's not scalable. But yeah, I've texted people, what's unfortunate is that I didn't even like, it was kind of, my decision was sudden enough that I didn't really take the time or prioritize the time to reach out to everybody that I valued as a colleague to say, "Hey, I'm moving, I'm leaving. Here's where I'll be. Here's all my contact info." So I've had kind of trickles of people reaching out to me on LinkedIn going, "Hey, how are you doing? I didn't realize you weren't at VMware." And me going, "Yeah, so sorry. I just ran out of time to reach out to everybody." And I didn't, take my my contact, my like work like Outlook, contacts with me. Like, I don't know. I I don't know if that was like, legally required, but I just felt like ethically that would be the right thing to do, is not take all my contacts with me. So, sometimes I just lost, the list of people that I was keeping in contact with. I think I was pretty good about adding everybody on LinkedIn, like as I went along. So, I do have that way of reaching out to people though. So, I felt pretty comfortable saying, you know, um, hey, let's go grab lunch. Or, since I'm at Google now, hey, if you're going to be in the city, come to Google and we'll have lunch here.
Nice.
Or we can meet in Mountain View and we'll go to one of the Google offices there, or Sunnyvale.
Wherever it's not going to cost me money for lunch, right?
Absolutely.
So, in other words, John's learned to be more frugal in interactions with former colleagues and in general.
Very frugally, yes. I
I
got you
love it.
there.
That's so good. Yeah, it's a challenge because when you're leaving, you have so many things to think about in a sales role. If you want to try and do the right thing, then you're probably thinking about how do I make sure the people who are taking over for me have all the information on the customers so that they can be serviced properly. And it's not like we build out this intricate web of all the people we talk to frequently or semi frequently so that we can make sure we go down the list and say, hey, I'm moving on. Let's keep in touch. It's one of those things where you only think about that at specific times and you're not going to remember them all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wish that I had done exactly that, right? Kind of taken, like, made a list and said, like, here's the people, like, if I ever needed to walk out the door, here's all the people that I would, want to keep, and make sure that, you know, I sent out a goodbye email. Like, I guess you just don't think about that, right? Like,
No,
here's
you don't.
here's my goodbye mailing list, day 3 at a new company, right? So when do you do that? And I guess that's a lesson learned for me, right? Is to, at some point in time, you want to make sure that you can, like, email all those people and let them know and give them your contact information and say, I'm still here, or here's where I'll be, or whatever it is that you do want to say. And I think I probably, prioritized making a transition, making sure that all of my customers were smoothly transitioned, as much of a brain dump as I could, you know, because I don't know, people have done that for me in the past, and then follow up by saying, well, actually, let me get a copy of my notes, you know, Chris Murdoch, I'm thinking about you, just over and over again. But I wasn't going to have the freedom to do that, right? Because I was walking out the door, so I wasn't going to take my notes with me, right? So, um, again, I don't know if that's like a legal thing, but it just felt like ethically it was the right thing to do. So I wanted to make sure to, like, upload them to a place, internally, like on an internal network where people had access to it, but also, you know, going through 3 years of notes is sometimes, like, useless. Like, here's, what you need to know, and, like, that seems like a little bit more valuable, and so, um, a compromise between, doing those two things was pretty important to me, like, making sure that, the raw stuff was available, but making sure that, like, here's what John thinks is really important, and here's a map of the organization as I know it, and here's, all the business issues as I understand them, and here's the order that I would approach things, but figure that, you maybe do your own priorities on your own, but here's what I think, as a snapshot as of this time, right? So, um, yeah, all those things were things that I did, and I spent, maybe more time doing that and not enough time thinking about continuity with the people that were important colleagues to me. And if there was, like, one major thing that I would do differently, it would be, to maintain that list ahead of time, so that because I don't know that I could have taken less time with my, customer transition and brain dumps of, their states. So, just making sure that, all the colleagues that I needed to keep in touch with, I had, all that information somewhere else, and, or, in a place where I could, hit, copy paste. Here's my goodbye email. Here's all my personal contact information for all of you to have.
Yeah, and maybe that's something to add as a footnote to the unexpected career opportunities segments we did, starting with episode 53. Maybe that should just be part of the iterative preparation or checklist that we do there, because it's not, how many times are you going to exit a company gracefully over the course of your, I don't know, 40 years in the workplace or more? Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah, no, it's very true, right? And I think that we talked about um having, that list of things like, when you leave a company, it's, and you don't have access to the internal directory, you don't have access to, like, well, what's the HR phone number? What's the, like, employment, like, issues phone number? So, like, I wanted to make sure that I had some of that stuff to, like, well, if I don't get my tax documents, who do I call? Like, those kinds of things. And there's, people's contacts I had on my phone, like my manager, like, so I could always reach out to some people like that. But yeah, like, all those other things that we just talked about, like, it's just kind of um outside of my experience, and it wasn't something that I'd really taken into account, and it was a learning experience, definitely.
So, as we get close to wrapping here, John, what would you say are other lessons you've learned after making this change that you'd like to share?
um I think that something that I said early on holds, and I don't mean earlier on in this episode, it was early on in the podcast. I think when I joined VMware as an SE, I had kind of targeted that as my dream job. And when you get a dream job, you have to immediately come up with a new dream, right? So just being an SE at VMware couldn't be the end goal because I had achieved it. So what's next? It's being, more senior, more highly skilled, more effective, and then later on it became, making sure that those skills, I can't have every single skill in the arsenal, right? There's just too many skills to master. So what are the things that I'm best at and that I enjoy the most, and concentrate on, kind of making sure that I'm highly skilled at that. Because, again, on any team, it's like a manager is going to look at their team and say, well, I have a portfolio of skills. So, when somebody looks at me as a member of that team, I want them to have a clear picture of, what it is that I'm bringing to that team, right? Is it business acumen, or is it the ability to, quickly spin up on technical subjects, or is it building a home lab? Well, it's not building a home lab. So what are the other things that it could be? And um, yeah, and making sure that, I had, clarity on, I think what I said was, like, John White as a product, right? As a customer engineer or sales engineer product, what is that product, and what is it that I'm bringing? And so, in slightly more general terms, it could be, you know, in any role, right? It doesn't have to be a sales engineering role. Maybe it's more of a tech marketing role, or I think at uh, Google Cloud or Google in general, it seems to be more described as developer relations. That role, what does that require? What does that look like? Do any of my skills, like, are they portable to that? If technical marketing is something that I want to get into, or product marketing, or product management, or any of a number of related roles. Maybe I want to work at an actual startup. What would the portfolio skills that would be most valuable for that look like? These are all things that I think that I wish that I had thought about ahead of time, right? And I was, like, maybe way more focused on my VMware career as a pure VMware career. Lesson learned, right?
Yeah. It sounds like you're encouraging people to dream in bands, just like episode 19, one of my favorites.
Man, whoever gave that advice was brilliant.
Yep,
Yes.
I would agree. That actually came out on a phone call with a buddy of ours. So
Yeah,
you
that's
know who you are if you're listening. But okay, John, any last parting advice or comments?
no, don't think so. Just a reminder again that we'd like people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful, and of course, we're always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm Nick Cordy at Network Nerd _ for John White at VJourneyman, signing off.
Adios.
Peace.